This video is intended purely for scientific and educational purposes only. I am a professional. I have an NVQ and a BTEC. Do not attempt to recreate anything that you see in the video at home.
I bought over 100 different king-size rolling papers to put them through their paces and find out which one is the best. Hello, I'm Uncle Haggy, and today we're going to be looking at perhaps the most well-known rolling paper company in the last 20 years, Raw. I've got every king-size slim paper that they currently produce. So that's the classics, which are the original unbleached, unrefined and unprocessed brown kingskin that kickstarted a revolution that changed the game forever, and something almost every other company has copied since. We also have the slightly thinner classic blacks, the much thinner Ethereals, the organic hemps and the organic hemp blacks. I didn't buy the collaborations that they did with Lyrical Lemonade, the hip-hop artist, as A, they are king wide size, not a king size slim, and B, they are flavoured papers. So for both of those reasons, I didn't pick them up as I wouldn't be able to compare them fairly to all the other papers in the lineup. Though, to my understanding, the Lyrical Lemonade papers are actually just the same as the organic hemp papers that Raw makes, but with those added flavourings and a little bit of dye. Like in my Elements review video, which are actually owned by the same company as Raw, HBI, there is very little useful information about their products on their website. The hemp papers are obviously made from hemp, but if you ask Google what the other papers are made from, a few websites state that they're made from a mixture of hemp and flax, otherwise known as linen. But as we learned from my last video on Rizzler, there seems to be a lot of confusion out there about what materials these companies use to make their rolling papers. On their Information Light website, they say the papers are made from, quote, an impeccable fusion of unbleached plant fibres. And on the front of the packaging it says they are made from the purest natural fibres. Both statements are just marketing buzzwords that have been put together to make a sentence and aren't very helpful if you wanted to know more about the papers. What that probably means though, like a lot of other kingskins on the market today, is that they are just some regular, unsexy wood pulp papers. I mean, they could have some different fibres in there, I'm not completely discounting it, but when I watched the founder of the company, Josh Kesselman, on a podcast with Goblin, he talks about ordering the first bulk roll of paper, or what they call a bobbin, to make Raw. In the interview, he only talks about how he wanted an unrefined finished product and he was having great difficulty in finding someone to make it for him. He didn't say anything about the materials, it was all about the process. And if he was finding it hard to get that first bulk order in just from how he wanted the paper to be manufactured, I very much doubt some company would make a proprietary blend of different fibres to make his paper. Maybe the materials have changed over the years, but I really doubt it. One reason why Raw might give out limited information about their papers is that in 2023 they had a legal dispute with Republic Brands, the owners of OCB, Tops, Zigzag and many others. In this dispute, Raw got into a little bit of trouble about some of the claims they made about their company and their products. This led to a ruling from a US federal court that they couldn't make these claims anymore. Now, I don't want to get into the whole thing here because I think the topic deserves its own video. But one thing that is important to mention from that 2023 ruling is, while 4 of the packs I have state that they're made in Spain, only one says it was made in the Spanish city of Alcoy, the so-called birthplace of rolling papers. This was a point of contention in that legal dispute, as one of the complaints was that Raw doesn't actually make its papers in Alcoy at all. In fact, they were buying bulk paper that was made some 400 miles away in southern France, with only the final stages of production and packaging happening in a town near Alcoy, not the city itself. And I do remember a few years ago that both Raw and Elements packaging would state that they were made in Alcoy, with the tagline, the birthplace of the rolling paper. And looking at the black hemps, which were clearly made before this injunction, another claim they were told to stop making was that their papers were made using wind power. And while the claim from Raw wasn't that clear, they did give that impression by putting this small wind turbine symbol on the pack. All the other packs that I have that were made after the court ruling no longer has that symbol. But moving on, from what I can gather, the classics and the organic hemps are the same thickness and are the thickest out of the lot. The next thinnest are both the blacks and the black hemps, which again are about the same sort of thickness. And then we have what are probably the thinnest rolling papers on Earth, the golden Ethereals. All of them come with 32 leaves per book and have an acacia gum line. The classics were the cheapest at £1 on the dot. The hemps and the original blacks were slightly more expensive at £1.25, and the black hemps cost me £1.50. The most expensive out of the bunch were the Ethereals, which were quite a bit more, and they cost me £2.99, 2 to 3 times what the other packs were. Now, the reason why the Ethereals cost me so much more is because they are significantly thinner than other kingskins, which you might might think, well, they're using less materials to make the product, then surely it would be cheaper, right? Well, in order to make a thinner paper, the machines that you use to roll it out have to run slower, meaning they can't produce as many in the same time frame as a thicker paper, which therefore increases the cost. The classics, the organic hemps, and the classic blacks are available with or without roach card, or what Raw call connoisseur packs. The other two, the black hemps and the Ethereals, seem to be only available on their own, though they do make an Ethereal roach card booklet, but you have to buy it separately. Now, I've covered a little bit of the history of Josh Kesselman in my Elements review video, though I didn't go into too much detail. And I got one thing slightly wrong in that video that I would like to correct here, but we'll get onto that soon. We start off in Queens, New York City, where Josh grew up. His father owned his own sweater making factory, which might explain Josh's knack for industrialism. His dad would do what Josh describes as magic tricks with rolling papers, where he would light one up in the air, and as it was thin enough and it burnt so quickly, it looked like it disappeared. This fascinated 5-year-old Josh, and when he grew up and got into smoking himself, he became obsessed with trying to get as many different rolling papers as possible, and he turned into a bit of a collector. He even made contacts in Europe to do pack swaps so he can get his hands on some more exotic skins. With his love for rolling papers and the knowledge that he gained, he opened up a head shop in Florida in the late 80s named Knuckleheads, which became a huge success. Though this came to an abrupt halt as he unwittingly sold a bong to a high-ranking customs official's daughter. She was an adult, but in the state of Florida, it was illegal to sell certain cannabis paraphernalia at the time, regardless of whether the buyer was of age or not. So unfortunately, this meant the store had to close down and most of the merchandise was seized, except for the rolling papers, as they weren't covered by the law. So a little bit battered and bruised, Josh picked himself up, dusted himself off, and moved to Arizona to try again. But this time the state was a lot more welcoming of Josh's type of entrepreneurship, and he turned this new venture into a roaring success. With his contacts over in Europe, Josh got to know a man named Jose Emilio in the early 90s. Jose was just about to reopen one of, if not the, oldest rolling paper factories in the world in Alcoy, Spain, which just happens to be the place that made Josh's father's favourite rolling papers, the ones that he would use for the magic tricks, the Malifes Datos. So the two got together to try and make a homage to those papers, and in 1995 they created Elements. Elements proved to be a bit of a niche paper at first, but it gave Josh enough momentum to make his second brand, Juicy J's, a brand focused on making wacky, colourful and flavoured papers. And this is what I got wrong in my Elements video, because I said that Juicy J's came before Elements did. Turns out you got to be really careful when you're researching rolling papers, because there's a lot of bullshit out there. But anyway, Josh always wanted to make a product that was far less processed and way more natural than any other rolling paper on the market. Ones that haven't been bleached with chlorine or had compounds like calcium carbonate added to them. And now, as he had the means to do so, he created the first raw paper in 2005, or what we now know as the classics. They were named raw to show off how unrefined these papers were, and because of a Big Daddy Kane song.
Here I am, R-A-W, a terrorist. Here to bring trouble to.
Now, I did mention this in my Elements review video, but I would like to make the point again here. If you've ever seen a video from Josh before, his whole ethos about making raw was having the purest possible rolling paper for the purest possible smoke. So I find it very confusing that Josh also owns the brand Juicy J's, as they are probably the complete opposite product from any of the raws. But at the end of the day, Josh's true skill is marketing. He's a natural salesman, as you can clearly see in his videos. He has built a business empire by making the same category of products that are aimed at different people that sit on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. That way you make money from everybody, and Josh has clearly been successful in this approach. But the success nearly didn't happen for Josh, as at first the company remained under the radar and for the first couple of years was a very niche brand. It wasn't until the late 2000s that the brand really started to take off, as it got big in the hip-hop world.
That means I'm greater. Do me a favor. If you got weed, then put it in raw papers.
Raw the shit when I pour fours. Every time I smoke, I like 4 rolls.
Okay. Nigga, that's raw. Take that OG Kush, put it in a raw.
And ever since then, the company has gone from strength to strength, and they started to produce different papers, with the Organic Hemps coming out in 2009 and a line of ready rolled cones a year later. It was quite a few years later, in 2017, when the first black papers hit the market, which were then followed by the Black Hemps in 2021, making their already thin papers even thinner. Then, in 2024, they released the even thinner Ethereals. In only a short number of years, Raw became perhaps one of the most famous companies in cannabis culture ever, and have branched out to make a vast array of different products, or what they call on their website, Rawducks. And in fact, they have a bunch of similar wordplays on their website, including this absolute stretch, Rawladays, which is meant to sound like holidays, but I mean, like, come on. But this is where they sell Valentine gifts, Christmas sweaters, and even this bubbler pipe bauble. What? But it doesn't stop there with the weird products, as they also make skateboards, dog toys, backpacks, beach towels, doormats, this really nice hat, and this not so nice hat. They also make more conventional products for a cannabis company, like rolling trays, grinders, and lighters, including this solar mirror lighter, which I can't see anyone having an accident with ever. But we're here for what made Raw the company it is today. It's rolling papers. So let's put them all to the test, run some experiments to see if the Raw fanboys are right about these being the best and purest papers in the world. First off, let's have a look at the packaging, and I think they have just gone through a redesign, as I had to pick up another pack of the classics because I spilled a bunch of water on them in one of the tests. And this new pack has an old-timely border around it on the front, which I'm not a massive fan of. But apart from that, there is no differences between the new and old packaging, so I'll just focus on the older designs for now. And much like what I said about the elements, while there is a lot going on and the pack is quite crowded, I think they found the sweet spot between too much and too little, and it just works. It's a shame they have so much writing on the back, but as these packs are made for the European market, they need to cover a lot of different languages rather than making country-specific packs. One thing that does confuse me slightly, both of the hemp papers have grass printed on the bottom of the packaging. Surely hemp leaves would make a lot more sense, given that's what they're made from, not grass, but okay, whatever. I'm a big fan of the metallic accents on both the Black's packaging, and the fact that they are slightly debossed into the cardboard. And while I do like shiny things, I think the ethereal packaging pushes it a little too far, and it's covered in this reflective gold that makes them a little bit gaudy in my opinion. It's almost like Donald Trump designed this pack, though it really makes them stand out from the rest. All of the packs, barring the ethereals, have a printed cross-string design, a little nod to the history of paper, as when you bought bulk paper back in the 1700s, it would be held together with a piece of string. A nice little touch in my opinion. What isn't a nice touch, however, is this little roundel on the front of each pack, which has the words authentic, official, and genuine. I think this is a cheeky tactic to fool people, as it kinda looks like a certification mark, a logo that companies add to their packaging when it's been certified by a third-party organization, like the FSC badge we covered last time in the Rizzler videos. They also have a few smaller ones on the back, like the wind turbine symbol on this older pack of Black Hemps that got them into hot water a few years ago. But they also have stamps stating that they are non-GMO, a feather on the Blacks, which I'm guessing just means that they are lightweight or they're made out of feathers or something, I don't know. One that says NCB, which means that they are not bleached with chlorine. This one of their Watermark, and perhaps the most outrageous of them all, a V with a leaf on it, which suspiciously kinda looks like the logo for the Vegan Society. And I've noticed over the last few years that more and more companies have started to add these lookalike symbols to their products. I don't think Raw started this trend, but I want to call them out on it anyway. It's just a sneaky move aimed at deceiving people rather than informing them. And while they are most likely not genetically modified, and I can tell you for a fact that they are vegan because, well, almost all paper is, but if you really wanted to show that off, then get it verified by that third party and put the legit kite mark on it. Don't rip it off. But how the packaging looks, or the bullshit marketing malarkey that they put on them, is the least important part of this review. The real question is, how do they perform? First up, the weigh-in. I will take all 32 papers out of each pack, remove any card or warning leaves, and put them on these milligram scales. Starting off with the classics, and they come in at a quite respectable 2.285 grams, which works out to be roughly 14.75 grams per square meter. Next up, we have the Blacks, and they they come in at just over 200 milligrams lighter than the classics at 1.974 grams, or a 12.75 GSM. And we haven't even got to the Ethereals yet, and when we put them on the scales, they come in at a remarkable 1.605 grams, or a staggering 10.36 GSM. Now, this blows every other single paper that I have looked at so far clean out of the water, and are a whopping 304 milligrams lighter than the previous lightest paper, the Element Phantoms, which is another one of Josh's inventions. The Phantoms were incredibly thin and quite hard to handle when I tested them in my Elements review video, so I'm amazed that these ones are so much lighter, and I wonder how they're going to handle when we get round to rolling one up. Moving on to the Hemps now, which were ever so slightly lighter than the Wood Pulp Classics at 2.221 grams, which works out to be 14.34 grams per square meter. And last up we have the Black Hemps, which were almost the exact same weight as their Wood Pulp Black counterparts, coming in at 1.953 grams, or a 12.61 GSM. And now we move on to the caliper test, and we have both the classics and the normal Hemps coming in at 1.3 millimeters. Both the Wood Pulp and the Hemp Blacks coming in at 1.1 millimeter, and the Ethereals coming in at just under a millimeter at 0.9. Looking at this table of all the caliper measurements that I've got so far, the classics and the Hemps match the Element Originals, while both blacks are thinner than any of the Rizzlers on the list, matching the Element Greens. But here's the interesting part: despite being over 300 milligrams lighter than the Phantoms, the Ethereals measure exactly the same thickness in the calipers. I know the calipers only go down to 0.1 millimeter, but it just goes to show how the density of a paper is a factor when you're trying to achieve the thinnest and lightest possible kingskin. Next up, we're going to test the durability of them. I'm going to pull on each paper 12 times in total, 3 on each side and axis, to see if they rip. And we have the classics, the classic blacks, the organic hemps, and surprisingly the Ethereals all passing with no rips or tears. The black hemps, however, didn't survive, and along with the Rizzler bamboos from my last video, they are the only papers to ever fail this test. Now we'll test the durability of the gum line. I'll stick one paper to another, wait 30 seconds for it to dry, and then pull on it 6 times to see if it holds. And again, we have the classics, the classic blacks, the original hemps, and the Ethereals that all didn't rip, so that's all a pass from them. But the black hemps ripped again, and the gum line didn't stay stuck. Now, as this is a pack from before that 2023 court ruling, could it be that these black hemp papers have degraded over time? It's possible, but I really don't think that's it. We'll see if this actually matters when I get round to rolling one up. Next up, we're going to look at how transparent or not these papers are. Now, in my previous review videos, I tested this by holding a torch and my fingers underneath the leaf to see how much light passes through, but it wasn't very easy to compare this to the other papers. So moving forward, I'm going to do things a bit differently. I'm going to lay each paper across this old CD case that I found, as it has some great contrasting colours on it. And by keeping the camera settings and lighting completely identical for every shot, we can get a true side-by-side look at which paper is the most see-through. Both the hemp papers are the most opaque out of the lot, with the organic hemp blacks just beating out the standard hemps for transparency. Sitting in third place, we have the standard classics, but the battle for that #1 spot is neck and neck, with the ultra-thin Ethereals maybe just edging out the classic blacks. But honestly, there is barely anything between them. All of the papers today feature the famous crisscross diamond watermark with vertical stop gaps, designed by Josh himself, and is one of the things that really makes Raw stand out from other brands. Unless you look at the Rizzler bamboos from my last video, which, shall we say, were inspired by this watermark. He originally designed it for his first brand, Elements, and I go into more detail on it in that video. But the short version of its reported benefits is this. The diamonds help regulate the burn by guiding the heat of the ember to sway from side to side for an even distribution of the heat, while the stop gaps are there to keep the burn consistent to try and prevent any running. Now we're going to test the pH of these papers to check for additives and see just how pure they really are. I'll start off by putting 30 ml of deionized water into this beaker, which gives us a baseline reading of 6.70. Then I'll pop 3 papers from each pack in, give them a stir, and let them sit there for a minute before testing again so we can see exactly how they shift the chemistry of the water. First up, the OG classics, and they come in at 6.47, 0.23 lower than the water, but that's actually what we should expect as the acacia gum strip is slightly acidic. And right behind them are the classic blacks, which were only 0.01 lower than the standard classics at 6.46. So another clean result, and so far we have very consistent chemical profiles. Next up are the Ethereals, and these two are in the same ballpark as the previous papers at 6.42. That's 0.28 less than the water's baseline, which does make them the most acidic out of the lot. But given how insanely thin these are, it does make sense. The acacia gum line represents a much larger percentage of the paper's total weight if they put the same amount of gum on all the different papers, which would pull that pH down just a little further. Now, moving on to the organic hemps, and this time we get a reading that jumped all the way up to 7.04, which is actually higher than the water's baseline number by 0.34. And then we have the organic hemp blacks that went even further, hitting 7.13. That's 0.43 higher than the baseline. Both numbers aren't a huge amount when you're talking about pH, but it is quite noticeable when we look at the results from the wood pulp papers, being about half a pH higher than they were. Since we know the acacia gum should be pulling the water towards the acidic side, this spike suggests that there might be an alkaline agent hiding in these hemp papers that is pushing the pH back up. We saw that with the element hemps, which I am now 99% sure that they had something in them because their pH was just so much higher, and when we burnt them, the ash was very white, suggesting there could be calcium carbonate in it. But with the Rizzler hemps from my last video, we also saw a slightly higher pH reading that closely matches the raw papers that we've just tested. For a little while now, I've been trying to figure out the best way to test for hidden additives like calcium carbonate without access to an £1 million lab, and I think I've finally come up with a solution. This is a TDS meter, which stands for total dissolved solids. Essentially, it measures the weight of the minerals that would be left behind if you were to boil off a full litre of that water. For example, when I test this tap water right here, we get a reading of 2H1. That means there is 281 milligrams of dissolved minerals in the water per litre. And when we test the deionized water, we can see that the reading is 0, which is exactly what you should expect from purified water. Now, while a TDS reader can't tell us exactly which minerals are leaching into the water, it is going to give us a clue to see if the paper has had a bunch of buffering agents added to them in the manufacturing process. I started by testing the standard classics as a baseline, as it had a good pH reading that suggested that they were free of additives. I followed the exact same procedure as the pH test with one small difference. I fished all the papers out of the beaker before taking the reading, as unlike a pH probe, a TDS meter can give you some odd readings if the paper fibers are physically touching the sensor. And when I put the meter into the classics water, we get a readout of 16, which isn't that surprising as the acacia gum has clearly leached into the water, giving us that tiny mineral bump. But then I tested the water from the standard organic hemps, and if they were packed full of fillers, you'll expect that number to be much higher. Instead, it only goes up by 1 milligram, landing at 17. And it just about proves that there are no hidden chemical additives or heavy chalk buffers that is causing that higher pH reading. The only logical explanation left is that the hemp fibers are naturally alkaline on their own. Now it's time for the burn test. I will stand a leaf upright in this tray, light it with a match and capture it on my phone in slow motion, which means I can count the frames to get a precise time for each one. We'll do 3 burns per pack and then we can get an average. In theory, the faster a paper burns on its own, the thinner and less dense it is, which should translate to a slower, cleaner smoke when it's actually rolled up. But as we saw with the Rizzlers in my last video, this isn't a foolproof experiment, as a lot of those came in with great open air burn times, but in practice they actually smoked down quite quickly. Kicking things off with the standard classics, and the 3 times were 11.70, 11.333 and 11.133 seconds, giving us a final average of 11.389 seconds. That's actually quite surprising, as it puts them right in the same ballpark as the Zigzag Silvers and the Rizzler Silvers. But I can tell you right now, these classics last way longer than those 2 papers when you actually smoke them. And if we look at the ash that is left behind after the burn, we can see it left virtually nothing behind. The entire sheet of paper completely combusted, leaving nothing but the tiny curled strips of acacia gum line. Moving on to the classic blacks, and they come in at times of 10.583, 9.833 and 9.983 seconds, giving us an average of 10.133 seconds, showing a clear step up in burn speed from the standard classics. Now, looking at the remnants left behind by the classic blacks, it actually looks like there is more ash this time than there was with the standard classics, which makes no sense at all for a thinner paper. I know a tiny bit of the standard classics ash floated off onto the table during the test, but even that wouldn't make up the difference here. Maybe these just had a slightly heavier line of gum on them, but I don't know. The organic hemps are next, and they come in of times of 11.20, 10.65, and 10.767 seconds, averaging 10.872, which is a little unexpected given how closely matched they are to the classics in weight and thickness. Out of the entire raw lineup, these organic hemps leave behind the largest amount of ash, but honestly, compared to some of the other paper brands that we tested on the channel so far, these still come up looking quite respectable. Next up are the organic hemp blacks, which clock in at 10.483, 10.233, and 9.767, giving us an average of 10.161. That makes them almost indistinguishable from their wood pulp counterparts, and once again we see more ash left behind here compared to the wood pulp papers. However, there is a noticeable amount less ash left behind this time around when you compare them directly to the standard hemps. And finally, we have the Ethereals, which completely blow everything we just looked at out of the water, coming in of blistering times of 8.233, 8.433, and 8.767 seconds, a crazy average of 8.478 seconds. Nothing else in this raw lineup comes anywhere close to this, and honestly, neither does anything else I've ever tested. That is a brand new record on the channel, and it beats out the previous closest paper, the Rizzler Microns, by a whopping 1.61 seconds. We can see again there is very little left over, but oddly enough, I actually think the standard classics take the win for leaving the least amount of ash behind, which, let's be honest, shouldn't make any sense at all. But hey ho, moving on, and this would normally be the last of the experiments, but when I was promoting some of my videos on Reddit, well, actually a more truthful statement is when I was spamming my videos on Reddit, I got a comment from someone saying I should be testing for heavy metals and called out Raw for allegedly having lead in their papers. So I bought some of these heavy metal reagent test strips, and my plan is to drop a single leaf of each paper out of the lineup into my beaker, fill it with 40 ml of deionized water, give it a good stir, and leave them to steep overnight. That way we can ensure that anything hidden in these papers has plenty of time to leach out into the water. Then at the same time I test the beaker, I will get a control strip in some pure clean deionized water. That way we can hold the two test strips side by side to look for any actual color changes, as I'm not a massive fan of those tiny little color charts they give you for these reagent tests. You can truly never match the shades, so a direct side by side comparison is going to give us a better understanding of what is or isn't in the papers. And after following the instructions on the back of the pack to the letter, we have our answer. As you can see, the strip on the left, the one that I dipped into the paper beaker, is actually ever so marginally darker than the control strip from the deionized water. This indicates that there are, in fact, trace amounts of heavy metals in the papers. I was absolutely gobsmacked when I first saw this, and I didn't truly believe it, so I decided to use another couple of strips, but lo and behold, the results came back exactly the same. I wanted to rerun the whole test from the start, as we could have just had a couple of false positives, but I only had 5 strips, so I couldn't do any more, unfortunately. Though going off the results we just had, there does seem to be something in these papers. Now, we're not talking about a massive dangerous amount here. Looking at the color chart on the back of the packaging, even though, as I said, it's almost impossible to match the shades perfectly, I would estimate the level is anywhere between 10 and 20 micrograms per litre of water, or 10 to 20 parts per billion. And in percentage terms, that's between 0.000001% to 0.000002%. If we take a look at this chart from the UK's 2016 water supply regulations, these papers should fall well under the maximum legal limits allowed for drinking water. Granted, different metals have different safety limits, and this generic test only shows the overall heavy metal content rather than breaking down exactly what's in there. And some of the metals these tests for are for things that we actually need in our diet, though I don't think smoking is the best way to ingest them, obviously. But either way, this really made me question Raw and their whole brand ethos. These are being sold as the cleanest, least processed papers on the market. But after doing a little bit of digging, I found a study from 2024 that analyzes 101 different rolling papers across a large range of brands. The researchers found that 90% of them contained detectable amounts of heavy metals, and more worryingly, 8% actually had unsafe levels. So this isn't a problem exclusive to Raw, or should I say, Rawclusive. It's an industry-wide reality. At this point, you might be thinking to yourself, well, is there a way that I can entirely avoid heavy metals when I want to get high? And the answer is yes, buy vaporizer or use a bong or a pipe or something like that. At the end of the day, inhaling combusted materials of any kind isn't exactly a health kick. But I really wish I had known about this before starting the channel, and moving forward, I'm definitely adding a heavy metals test for every paper that we review. So now it's time for the ultimate test. I'm gonna roll up a perfectly ordinary, completely above board, pure, unadulterated, 100% legal tobacco king-size roll-up, wink wink, to see how these papers handle, how they burn, and exactly how they taste. Now, normally I would film myself smoking each one and go through it there. But to try and save some time, and because I end up repeating myself in the conclusion anyway, here's a quick montage of me putting the papers to the test with my lungs. Right, back here in the studio, and I'll go through the pros and cons of each of the papers, but first, let's have a look at the brand as a whole. So first off for the pros, and no matter what raws you're choosing, you're getting a high quality product for a solid price. If you're just popping to your local shop and you want to pick up a pack of Kings on a whim, then raws do tend to cost just that little bit more than other brands like OCB and Rizla. But barring the Ethereals, I picked up all of these packs for £1.50 or less, and at that price, I think most of them are absolutely worth it. But if you buy them in bulk, the value is even better. If you want to commit to a 50 pack of the classics, then you can get that price down to around 40p a pack. Next up, all the papers that we're looking at today burn very evenly, and I haven't had any major issues with running at all. Very occasionally you have to get your lighter on it just to help it out a bit, especially when you first light one up. But really, these are probably some of the most even burning papers that you can get. A big reason for that consistent burn, I think, is their famous crisscross watermark design, which gives it a really distinct look. And the final pro of Raw as a brand is, these papers are made by someone who seems like he really does care about trying to make the absolute best product possible. If this video of Josh throwing out a bulk paper roll because it didn't meet his high standards is to be believed, their quality control is incredibly strict. I, for one, have never had a pack of raws that had any major issues with them, like the gum line not being evenly spread like I had with the zigzag silvers from my first video. And now for the cons, and first up, this lawsuit with Republic Brands and some of the dubious claims that Raw have made over the years is a little concerning. None of the claims were too outrageous when you look into them, but the thing is, people tend to buy into a brand because of its story, and Raw's story was a very romantic one. The idea of these papers being made in a small historic factory nestled somewhere in the Spanish mountains by a passionate, charismatic and plucky American is a great feel-good tale. It's likely what convinced quite a lot of people to buy Raw in the first place. But then you learn the truth. The paper itself is actually made in France, and only the final touches are done in Spain, and even then, it's not even in the city that they claim. It just leaves you with a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth. I still believe Josh is dedicated to creating the best possible product, but at the end of the day, he has things that he wants to sell to you, and his livelihood depends on that. So when you watch any of his videos or buy any Raw product, then just keep that in mind. And though this isn't Raw's fault, unless you want to blame him for being too successful, but there are a lot of fakes out there, and you have to be quite careful where you buy your papers. You might be thinking the exact same thing I did. Who on earth is going out of their way to copy a pack of rolling papers? Copying a designer handbag or an expensive pair of trainers is one thing, but rolling papers? It just beggars belief that this is someone's or multiple people's jobs to counterfeit a product that you can legitimately buy for about £1, and even cheaper in bulk. But I suppose if they're faking chicken eggs in China, then nothing is off limits. And finally, this whole heavy metal situation that we uncovered earlier is definitely something to think about. While we know this issue isn't exclusive to Raw, these just happen to be the very first papers where I became aware of the problem and actually tested for it. Now, as I've mentioned before, I'm really not a big fan of these reagent test kits. At the very best, they give you a sort of rough suggestion of what's going on, a sort of ballpark figure, if you will. And this kit in particular tests for things that we actually need in our diet, so are probably a little bit less concerning than, say, mercury or lead. So while they are useful to a degree for certain applications, they're mostly just a screening tool to tell you whether or not you need to run an actual laboratory analysis. And while our test did show that the colours on the paper's water strip was a tiny bit darker than the pure water, it's still not enough to say with 100% certainty that these papers contain heavy metals. But now let's move on to the pros and cons of each specific paper, starting off with the classics. First up for the pros, and even after all of these years, these classics are some of the slowest burning papers that you can get, and the flavour that you get from them is amazing. Yet at the same time, these are the fastest burning and worst tasting papers out of today's lineup. But even though these are the thickest raws out there, you don't get any papery taste at all. And while their times in the burn test weren't great and they aren't the most lightweight papers out there, for some reason in practice when you actually roll one up, they last way longer than any of those papers that beat them. Is that down to the Watermark? Well, the Element Originals have the same one and they are very similar to the classics in terms of weight and thickness, but they smoked quite quick. So maybe it's down to the fact that these are unbleached and somehow that affects the burn rate. Or maybe they do add other fibers like flax into the mix when they're making the paper. Apart from that, I can't explain it. You also have to give them credit for changing the entire market, as before these came out, everyone was smoking white bleached paper. Raw Classics really popularized that natural unbleached look and feel that we all take for granted now. They are also incredibly easy to find, with loads of corner shops and head shops stocking them as standard, and places like Poundland even selling them. And now for the cons, and like I've said in every video I've done on rolling papers so far, I am really not a fan of that sort of slick glossy feel that you get with certain brands of unbleached papers. It just doesn't mix very well when I've got really dry hands, which happens quite often. That dislike actually started the very first time I ever used a Raw Classic. It was probably back in the late 2000s, but I completely buggered up the roll because I couldn't get any grip on the paper. I ended up twisting it round the roach, which led to a bendy, poor smoke. And even though I'm a much better roller now than I was back then, I still have a little bit of an aversion to using an unrefined wood pulp paper because of that incident. And last up, for the classics, the throat hit that you get from them isn't that great in my opinion. They're excellent for flavour, of course, because they burn slowly enough to ensure that the ember doesn't get too hot. But I always think there's a happy medium in between having a flavourful smoke and actually feeling it when you inhale, and these raws only sit on one side of that equation. Next up, we have the classic blacks, and the first pro is they have an even slower burn rate than the standard classics, and by quite a noticeable margin. But along with that slower burn, they do taste ever so slightly better as well, though the difference in flavour isn't that big when you directly compare them. And while they aren't quite as common as the standard classics, you do see them out and about pretty often, and any boss man who knows what's up will stock them. Now for the cons, and these are even glossier than the standard classics are, but the jump between them isn't that massive. So if you can roll with the originals with no issues and you want to move on to that next level, then I don't think you're going to have a problem with these. And again, like the standard classics, the mouthfeel and the throat hit that you get from these papers isn't that great, and it's hard to get a full-on toke. Another thing to keep in mind is the gum line. Because the paper is so thin, it doesn't take a lot of moisture to over wet it. So if you're a bit of a heavy tongue licker, you can actually end up taking the gum line off. And because they burn so incredibly slow, if you stop hitting on it for even a minute, you'll find yourself constantly relighting it, which can get quite annoying if you wanted a continuous relaxing smoke. Now we move on to the pros of the Ethereals, and unsurprisingly, these are the slowest burning papers out of the entire Raw lineup. However, the gap between these and the classic blacks isn't as great as the gap between the classic blacks and the original classics. And as for the taste of them, well actually I don't think these do have a better flavour than the classic blacks. It just matches that same high standard. And now for the cons, and if you think I had a problem handling the classics and their even thinner black counterparts, then these Ethereals are on a completely different level, and they are insanely hard to roll up with. Not only are they slippery and glossy like the other two papers, but these have no structural integrity whatsoever. I actually had it happen where I picked it up when rolling and it just flopped over and half the contents just went out on the table. And even after you roll one up successfully, it just feels really delicate. You constantly feel like you have to be extra careful when handling it. Ironically, when we tested the strength of them earlier, they actually held up pretty well, unlike the Black Hemps and those puny Rizzler bamboos from my last video. But mentally, the floppiness is still there. Because of that, you have to make sure whatever you're packing inside has to be a tight, compact roll. If you roll one up slightly loose, then you're going to get that constant annoying feeling that it's about to bend or break on you at any moment, and it can affect the evenness of the burn. Secondly, Secondly, they are quite pricey. They are twice the price of the classic blacks, and they are 3 times more expensive than the standard classics. And are they 2 or 3 times better than those papers are? Well, personally, I would say no. If you're looking for the absolute thinnest paper on the market, then yeah, sure, these Ethereals are your bag. But this is exactly where I think the law of diminishing returns comes into play. The actual margin of benefit that you get with these papers over the classic blacks, or even just the standard classics for that matter, just isn't worth the extra cash in my opinion. And to wrap it up for the Ethereals, they're just not that available. In my area, I have never seen these once in any corner shop. Now we're going to move on to the organic hemp papers, and the first pro of these are they are just so much easier to roll up with than the wood pulp papers are because they have a nice matted feel to them. It's almost like they have a cloth-like texture to them, which is something I've never really experienced with any other hemp paper. It gives them a slightly more luxurious feel when you're skinning up with them that I really like. And while they don't burn as slowly as the standard classics, they are not that far off, and you're still going to get a pretty nice long session with these hemps. Next up, they are incredibly eco-friendly. As a crop, hemp is remarkably easy and fast to grow. It requires very little maintenance and uses significantly less water than trees do to produce the same amount of paper. So if being green is an important factor for you when you're buying any product, then these hemp papers are definitely going to fit the bill. And lastly, just like the classic blacks, while they aren't quite as common as the standard classics are, you do still see them when you're out and about quite a bit. So if you just needed to pick up a pack on the go, then you're quite likely to come across them. Now, I couldn't think of many cons for the organic hemps, as they're actually one of my personal favourite papers to use. Because of that, this first downside might sound just a little odd, but every time I handle one of these papers, for some reason, they feel wet in my hands. It's like when you touch something that's really cold and your brain can't quite tell whether it's actually wet or just cold. To be honest, it's not a massive problem, but that part of the sensory feel to them isn't particularly nice, and I have never had that with any other paper. And last up for the organic hemps, while they do have a slow burn rate, they don't last quite as long as the classics do. So if getting the absolute longest and slowest burn possible is your main goal, then I would choose one of the wood pulp papers instead. And now, last up, we have the organic hemp blacks. And the pros are, like the normal hemps, they are incredibly eco-friendly. Next up, while these are slightly harder to roll up with than the original hemps, and they are a bit less cloth-like because they are thinner, they are still way easier to wrap up with than any of the non-hemp papers in the raw lineup. And because they're thinner than the standard hemps, they do burn slower than they do. But with that being said, I still think even the OG classics are going to give you a longer lasting session than these black hemps. Out of the entire raw lineup, these, alongside the organic hemps, are actually some of my favourite papers of all time. But there are a few things that are wrong with them. First off, these are actually quite weak papers, and the gum line on them isn't nearly as strong as almost any other paper that I've ever tested. Out of 23 papers that I've put through the strength test so far, the black hemps are only one of 2 papers that completely failed the experiment. Though when I was actually rolling up with them, I had no issues whatsoever. And these black hemps also have that sort of wet and cold sensory feel to them that I didn't like. It's not a deal breaker, but it definitely adds to that fragile and delicate feeling when you're rolling up with them. And while these do have more structural integrity to them than the super thin Ethereals, they still feel like they can flop at any moment. Now, I haven't had them personally collapse on me like with the Ethereals, but that constant worry just makes the whole rolling experience just that little bit more stressful. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is a wrap on our deep dive into every raw paper on the shelves today. But I want to hear your take. Are you a die-hard raw fanboy, or do you think they're overrated? Has any of today's data changed your perspective on their papers at all? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video useful and you want to help the channel scale up, please leave a like and hit subscribe, as it will go a really long way to help an independent channel like this grow. I've been Uncle Haggy. Take it easy. Until next time.